What happens when a man tries to steal everything you've built? When Eleanor Thorne lost her husband in a suspicious accident, she didn't retreat. She became the toughest wilderness guide in the American West. Now, as a ruthless corporate raider, destroys her equipment and threatens her livelihood. He has no idea he's challenging a woman whose mind contains what no GPS ever could. A flawless mental map of 500 miles of the most treacherous terrain this side of the Rockies. In the tradition of true American resilience, this is the story of how one woman's extraordinary memory becomes her ultimate weapon against those who thought they could bury her alongside her dreams. Drawing on skills the greatest generation would recognize, self-reliance, grit, and good old-fashioned know-how, Eleanor is about to navigate a deadly labyrinth without modern technology, facing both natural dangers and human enemies who'll stop at nothing to claim a treasure that could change national security forever. This is the memory map, where the old ways proved superior to new technology when the stakes couldn't be higher. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon walls as Eleanor Thorne stood outside her outfitting station, scanning the horizon for her clients who were now 3 hours late. Her weathered hands checked her equipment for the fourth time that day. Compasses calibrated, water purifiers tested, emergency beacons charged. Everything was ready for the expedition that would finally secure her outfitting business's future and honor the legacy her husband had left behind. At 45, Eleanor's face told the story of a life lived beneath harsh sun and whipping winds. The fine lines around her eyes had deepened in the 4 years since Michael's death, but they framed eyes that missed nothing, eyes that had mapped every inch of terrain they'd ever encountered. Her chestnut hair, now streaked with silver that had appeared in the months after the accident, was pulled back in a practical braid. She was lean and strong, built for endurance rather than speed, exactly what the unforgiving landscape of Ironwood Canyon demanded. The outfitting station itself was modest but meticulously organized. A main cabin with an attached equipment shed nestled at the edge of Sentinel Pass, the gateway to the most spectacular and dangerous sections of the canyon. Maps lined the walls, each one annotated in Eleanor's precise handwriting, though she rarely needed to consult them. Every route, every elevation change, every seasonal water source was imprinted in her memory with photographic precision, a gift she had had since childhood, but had honed to perfection during her 17 years guiding alongside Michael. Her satellite phone buzzed, pulling her attention from the horizon. "Thorne Outfitters," she answered, voice clipped with the efficiency her clients had come to expect. "Mrs. Thorne." The voice belonged to Dr. Harrison Wells, lead researcher for the geological survey team she was scheduled to guide. "There's been a complication. The university is reconsidering the expedition." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. "Reconsidering? We've been planning this for 8 months, Dr. Wells. Your team has exclusivity contracts with my outfit. The permits alone cost—" "I understand," he interrupted, his tone carefully neutral, "but we've received some concerning information about the viability of the route you've proposed." "What concerning information?" The question came out sharper than she intended. This expedition wasn't just another job. It was the financial lifeline her struggling business needed. After Michael died, half their regular clients had drifted to other outfitters, unconvinced a woman alone could safely guide them through terrain that claimed lives every year. "A report indicating the northern passage you mapped might not exist, that continuing with your proposed route could endanger my research team." Ice formed in Eleanor's stomach. "That's impossible. I've traversed that passage myself 7 times, most recently last month during the pre-expedition scout. Nevertheless, the university board has concerns. I've been instructed to delay our departure while we reassess." "Who provided this report?" Eleanor demanded, already suspecting the answer. The hesitation on the line confirmed her fears before Wells even spoke. "Richard Blackwood submitted the safety assessment." Of course. Blackwood Expedition Company had been trying to absorb her small outfit for years, first with lowball buyout offers when Michael was alive, then with increasingly aggressive tactics after his death. Richard Blackwood had made no secret of wanting exclusive guiding rights to the entire Ironwood Canyon territory, especially now that the discovery of rare earth minerals was bringing research teams and mining interests to the region. "Dr. Wells, I can send you my detailed survey notes from last month's scout. The Northern Passage not only exists, but it's the only viable approach to your research site that doesn't require specialized climbing equipment. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Thorne, but I'm afraid the board won't make a decision until next week at the earliest. I'm sorry. The call ended, leaving Eleanor staring at the equipment she'd spent weeks preparing. Equipment that represented 3 months of advance payment she'd already spent on supplies, insurance, and hiring 2 assistant guides who were scheduled to arrive tomorrow. She placed the satellite phone carefully on the workbench, her mind already calculating the financial damage. Without the university expedition, she couldn't make the loan payment on the outfitting station. Without the station, she had no business. Without the business, she had nothing left of the life she and Michael had built together. A sound pulled her attention. The distant rumble of vehicles approaching from the canyon access road. Not her clients then, but someone. Eleanor stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the setting sun, as 2 black SUVs appeared on the dusty road, trailing clouds of red earth behind them. The vehicles pulled up in front of the outfitting station, too new and too clean for the local ranchers or regular guides who occasionally stopped by. 4 men emerged from the first SUV, all wearing dark clothes despite the heat, all moving with the deliberate confidence of men used to intimidation. From the second vehicle stepped a figure Eleanor recognized instantly, his tailored desert wear and silver-streaked beard unmistakable even at a distance. "Richard," she acknowledged as he approached, not bothering to mask the ice in her voice. "Quite a coincidence. You showing up right after your false report cost me my biggest contract of the season." Richard Blackwood smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. At 60, he'd built the largest outfitting company in 3 states through methods that bordered on predatory. "No coincidence at all, Ellie. I wanted to see you in person when you realized it's time to be reasonable." "Don't call me Ellie." The childhood nickname felt like an invasion coming from him. They'd grown up in the same small town on the canyon's edge, had even dated briefly in high school before his ambition and her independence pulled them in different directions. "And there's nothing reasonable about corporate sabotage." Richard sighed dramatically, glancing at the men who had positioned themselves around the property's perimeter. "Always so melodramatic. I simply provided the university with my professional assessment of the risks. That North Passage of yours washed out in the flash flood last spring. Continuing to market it as a viable route is negligent at best, criminally reckless at worst. You're lying." Eleanor stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated on her own property. "I walked that passage myself 4 weeks ago. The flood debris has been cleared since March." "Your word against mine." He shrugged, examining the outfitting station with the calculating gaze of someone already measuring for renovations. "And unfortunately for you, the university board includes 2 of my oldest clients. They trust my assessment." "What do you want, Richard?" His smile widened. "The same thing I've wanted for 4 years, to buy you out. Only now I'm being exceptionally generous given your financial predicament." He pulled a folded document from his pocket. 40% of market value, which is 30% more than this place will be worth after foreclosure. Eleanor didn't bother taking the paper. "Not interested. You're facing bankruptcy, Ellie. Without the university contract, you can't make your loan payment at the end of the month. I've checked." The violation of her financial privacy didn't surprise her, but it stoked the anger simmering beneath her carefully controlled exterior. "I'll find another client." "In 2 weeks? With your reputation increasingly in question?" Richard gestured to one of his men, who began walking toward the equipment shed. "Face reality. No one believes a widow with no formal training can safely guide expeditions through terrain that killed her more experienced husband." The deliberate cruelty of the statement hit its mark, but Eleanor refused to give him the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Instead, she moved to block the man approaching her shed. "Your associate is trespassing. Hector is simply assessing the equipment inventory for the sale." "There is no sale. Get off my property." Richard's expression hardened, the pretense of civility evaporating. "You have until tomorrow afternoon to accept my offer. After that, it gets withdrawn. I've already arranged to accommodate the university team once they terminate your contract officially. By this time next month, this outfitting station will be part of Blackwood Expedition Company, whether you sell to me directly or I buy it for pennies at auction." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Ellie, check your equipment carefully before your next outing. Terrible shame how safety gear can malfunction in these harsh conditions." The threat hung in the air as he returned to his vehicle. The man called Hector lingered by the equipment shed, meeting Eleanor's gaze with cold assessment before rejoining the others. The SUVs departed in a cloud of dust, leaving Eleanor alone with the sinking realization that Richard wouldn't stop at sabotaging her client relationships. As darkness fell, she methodically inspected every piece of equipment in the shed, finding what she feared. Ropes with nearly invisible cuts through the safety fibers, compromised water purifiers, tampered emergency beacons, and all 6 of her satellite GPS units completely destroyed, their internal components corroded from some liquid solution. The specialty equipment represented thousands of dollars she couldn't replace, not without the university contract. More devastating than the financial loss was the realization that Richard knew exactly how to destroy her. Without this equipment, she couldn't safely guide any expedition, even if she found a last-minute client willing to hire her. The calculated malice of it, targeting the tools she relied on rather than confronting her directly, was pure Richard. He'd always preferred to let circumstances break his opponents while keeping his own hands seemingly clean. Eleanor worked through the night, testing every piece of equipment, salvaging what she could, and making a precise inventory of the damage. By dawn, exhaustion had hardened into resolve. She would not let Richard Blackwood erase everything she and Michael had built. There had to be a way forward, some client who wouldn't be scared off by Richard's influence. She was securing the damaged equipment when the sound of an approaching vehicle drew her outside once more. A battered Jeep pulled up, its aged frame covered in the red dust of the canyon roads. Relief washed through her as she recognized Joseph Morningstar, the elderly Navajo guide who had taught both her and Michael the canyon passages decades ago. Though officially retired at 78, Joseph remained the most knowledgeable person about the territory and one of the few people Eleanor considered a true friend. "You look like hell," he observed by way of greeting, his weathered face creasing with concern as he took in her exhausted appearance. "Blackwood paid me a visit yesterday." She led him inside, putting coffee on the small stove. Joseph settled his lean frame into a chair, watching as she recounted the confrontation and the sabotaged equipment. When she finished, he nodded slowly, as if her news merely confirmed what he already suspected. "Richard always wanted what he couldn't have," Joseph remarked, accepting the steaming mug she offered. "Back when you chose Michael over him, I knew he'd never forgive either of you. Now that Michael is gone, he thinks you're vulnerable." "I am vulnerable," Eleanor admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "Without equipment, I can't guide. Without clients, I can't replace the equipment. He's backed me into a corner." Joseph studied her over the rim of his mug. "Only if you play by his rules." "What's the alternative?" "You know these canyons better than anyone alive. Better than me now. Better than Richard and his GPS units. Your memory is what Michael used to call topographically eidetic. You see a place once, and it's mapped in your mind forever." Eleanor shook her head. "Clients don't pay for memory. They want technology, safety equipment, modern conveniences." "Most clients, yes." Joseph set down his coffee and reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded letter. "But I received this yesterday from an old acquaintance. Gabriel Sullivan is leading a private expedition to locate his grandfather's lost mining claim in the northern section of the canyon. He specifically requested a guide who knows the terrain intimately because the claim's location was deliberately obscured from official records." She accepted the letter, scanning its contents with growing interest. Sullivan was offering a substantial fee, enough to cover her loan payment and begin replacing the sabotaged equipment if she could successfully lead his team to the claim site. "Why come to you instead of Blackwood?" she asked, suspicious of convenient timing. "Sullivan's grandfather and I served together in Korea, and he's had conflicts with Richard in the past. Mining rights disputes that got ugly." Joseph leaned forward. "He's arriving tomorrow with a team of 4. Taking them to the claim site and back would be a 10-day expedition through exactly the territory you know best." "The Northern Passage," Eleanor murmured, possibilities suddenly opening before her. Without GPS or modern navigation, they would need a guide with perfect recall of the terrain. Joseph's eyes sparkled with something like mischief. Someone who could find her way through the most treacherous sections of canyon country using nothing but memory and natural navigation markers. For the first time since Richard's visit, Eleanor felt the weight on her shoulders lighten fractionally. It was risky. Guiding without her usual equipment redundancies went against everything she and Michael had built their reputation on. But it might be her only chance to save what remained of their shared dream. Does Sullivan understand the risks of going in with minimal technology? She asked. He's old school. Prefers it, actually. Doesn't trust GPS in canyon country anyway. Too many dead zones, too many signal bounces off the walls giving false readings. Joseph finished his coffee. But it's your call, Eleanor. No one would blame you for walking away, starting fresh somewhere else. The thought had never occurred to her. This place, these canyons, were as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. The routes and passages lived in her mind with perfect clarity. The seasonal spring hidden behind the split rock at Whisper Canyon. The narrow ledge that provided the only safe crossing at Devil's Elbow during high runoff. The subtle changes in rock coloration that signaled dangerous instability along Widow's Ridge. She and Michael had mapped it all together, their shared passion becoming a language only they spoke fluently. Walking away would mean losing the last connection she had to him, to the life they'd built on their shared love of this harsh, beautiful wilderness. I'll meet with Sullivan, she decided, already mentally cataloging what minimal equipment she could cobble together by tomorrow. If he understands what we're working with and still wants to proceed, I'll take the job. Joseph nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. I told him you'd say that, and I brought something you might need. He reached into his pack and withdrew an old leather case, which he placed on the table between them with reverence. Eleanor recognized it immediately. Michael's traditional navigation kit, the one he'd used before they'd gradually upgraded to modern equipment. Inside would be his lovingly maintained compass, sextant, paper maps, and the small notebook filled with his observations about seasonal changes to the canyon's features. He'd want you to have these now, Joseph said quietly. And Eleanor, Richard Blackwood may have technology and money and connections, but he's forgotten what it means to truly know the land. You haven't. As the morning sun broke fully over the canyon walls, illuminating the outfitting station in gold and crimson light, Eleanor ran her fingers over the worn leather of her husband's navigation case. Inside was everything she needed to guide Sullivan's expedition. That and the perfect map already etched in her memory, one that no sabotage could ever erase. What she didn't yet realize was that Sullivan's expedition would lead her not just to a lost mining claim, but into a decades-old conspiracy that would put her remarkable memory to the ultimate test and place her directly in the crosshairs of enemies far more dangerous than Richard Blackwood. Will Eleanor's extraordinary memory be enough to navigate the treacherous canyon without modern equipment? What secrets lie hidden in Gabriel Sullivan's grandfather's lost mining claim? And could Richard Blackwood be involved in something more sinister than corporate sabotage? Continue listening to find out. If you're enjoying this journey through the dangerous canyons of the American West, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Our next story about courage in the face of impossible odds will be coming your way tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it. Now let's continue with Eleanor's perilous expedition. Dawn had barely broken over the canyon rim when a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, announcing the arrival of Gabriel Sullivan and his expedition team. Eleanor had been awake for hours, assembling what functional equipment remained and studying Michael's old maps by lantern light. The paper was yellowed with age. The handwritten notes faded, but for her they served more as confirmation than guidance. The true map existed in her mind, unalterable and precise. She stepped onto the porch as the caravan of 3 vehicles pulled up. 2 rugged jeeps and a supply truck, all bearing the distinctive logo of Sullivan Mining Incorporated. The lead vehicle stopped, and a man in his late 50s emerged. Gabriel Sullivan had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors, his silver hair cropped short, his movements efficient despite a noticeable limp. He approached with hand extended. Mrs. Thorne, Gabriel Sullivan, thank you for agreeing to guide us on such short notice. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and assessing. Eleanor returned both. Mr. Sullivan, Joseph speaks highly of you. Joseph saved my grandfather's life in Korea. Our families have a bond. Shirishorn. His eyes flickered to the outfitting station, taking in the modest setup. I understand you've had some equipment issues recently. That's one way of putting it. Eleanor didn't elaborate. If that's a concern, Blackwood Expedition Company is 30 miles south. They have state-of-the-art everything. Sullivan's expression hardened. I wouldn't hire Richard Blackwood to guide me across a parking lot. Man's more interested in his profit margins than keeping his clients alive. He gestured to his team, who were unloading gear from the vehicles. We brought our own supplies and basic equipment. What we need is your knowledge. As if on cue, the team members gathered around. Sullivan made the introductions. Dr. Olivia Ramirez, his geologist. Marcus and Nathan Brooks, brothers who specialized in mining engineering, and Grace Chen, his company's legal counsel. An unusual addition for a wilderness expedition, but Eleanor didn't comment. Mrs. Thorne will be guiding us to my grandfather's claim site, Sullivan explained to his team. She knows routes through this canyon system that don't appear on any official maps. Olivia, a compact woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes, stepped forward. Is it true what they say? That you can navigate the entire territory from memory? I don't make claims about my abilities, Eleanor replied, uncomfortable with the direct question. But I've been traversing these canyons for over 20 years. I know them intimately. Marcus Brooks, the older of the two brothers, looked skeptical. With all due respect, ma'am, we're talking about over 500 square miles of some of the most confusing terrain in North America. Ravines that all look identical, passages that change after every flash flood. That's exactly why we need her, Sullivan interjected before Eleanor could respond. GPS is unreliable in the deep canyons, and my grandfather deliberately kept his claim location off official records. All we have are his journal notes, which reference landmarks rather than coordinates. Mrs. Thorne, Grace Chen spoke up, her crisp business attire incongruous against the rugged landscape. Perhaps you could explain your navigation methodology to ease any concerns. Eleanor considered for a moment, then nodded toward the canyon that stretched before them, its layered walls glowing amber in the morning light. See that formation to the west? Most people would describe it as just another cliff face, but notice the diagonal striation patterns, the way the shadow creates a natural pointer at this time of day that marks the entrance to Sidewinder Pass, which cuts 15 miles off the northern approach during dry seasons. Ursina, she continued, pointing out barely perceptible features. A specific arrangement of boulders that indicated a seasonal water source, an unusual growth pattern in the vegetation that signaled stable ground beneath unstable appearances. A subtle color variation in the rock face that marked one of the few safe ascent routes to the upper ridgeline. The team listened with increasing attention, even Marcus's skepticism fading as she demonstrated knowledge no GPS could provide. The living memory of a landscape that changed constantly, yet followed patterns that, once learned, could be read like a familiar book. We'll leave in 1 hour, Sullivan decided, apparently satisfied. According to my grandfather's journal, the journey to the claim site should take 5 days at a steady pace. 7, Eleanor corrected. The journal was written 50 years ago. 2 of the passages he likely used have collapsed since then. We'll need to take the ascension route around Broken Tooth Ridge. Sullivan raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. 7 days it is. As the team dispersed to make final preparations, Eleanor noticed Grace lingering, studying her with barely concealed curiosity. Something on your mind, Ms. Chen? Eleanor asked, securing her pack. I'm just intrigued by someone who chooses this life, Grace replied, gesturing to the isolation surrounding them. Especially after, she hesitated. After my husband died, Eleanor finished for her. I didn't choose this life after Michael was gone. I chose it long before I met him. The canyon was here first. Grace nodded, accepting the boundary Eleanor had drawn. Mr. Sullivan has been searching for his grandfather's claim for over a decade. It's become something of an obsession. People get that way about the canyon, Eleanor said. It pulls at something primal, the mystery, the challenge, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. Is that what happened to your husband? The question came softly, but Eleanor felt its impact like a physical blow. My husband's death wasn't a mistake. It was sabotage. The words emerged before she could reconsider, hanging in the air between them. She'd never stated it so boldly before, not even to Joseph. Grace's eyes widened. You believe someone deliberately caused the rock slide? I know they did. The primary anchor points had been tampered with. Eleanor turned away, unwilling to revisit that particular memory. But the sheriff ruled it an accident. Natural rock slides happened frequently enough that one more didn't raise suspicions. Except with me. I saw the evidence before the secondary slide buried it. Eleanor shouldered her pack, ending the conversation. We should join the others. Daylight's valuable in the canyon. The expedition moved out just as the sun cleared the eastern rim, casting long shadows across their path. Eleanor led them along what appeared to be a game trail, but was actually an ancient route used by indigenous peoples for centuries before European settlers arrived. It wound through stands of juniper and pinyon pine before descending gradually toward the mouth of the main canyon system. Sullivan walked beside her for the first hour, consulting a worn leather journal that Eleanor assumed had belonged to his grandfather. The first landmark he mentions is something called Whispering Rock, a boulder formation where wind creates a sound like human voices. Eleanor nodded. It's about 6 miles in, at the junction of Phantom Creek and the main wash. We should reach it by midday. You know it. Sullivan seemed pleased but not surprised. Every major formation in this territory has a name and a story, Eleanor explained. Whispering Rock marks the traditional boundary between what used to be considered safe passage and what the old-timers called deserters' country. Terrain so confusing that outlaws would hide there, knowing even experienced trackers would get lost trying to find them. The morning progressed smoothly, the team maintaining a steady pace despite the increasing heat. Eleanor watched them with professional assessment. Olivia moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to field work, conserving energy and staying alert to her surroundings. The Brooks brothers worked in seamless tandem, supporting each other on tricky sections without needing verbal communication. Only Grace seemed out of place, though she tackled the difficult terrain with determination, if not grace. As predicted, they reached Whispering Rock by noon. The massive sandstone formation stood at the junction of two ancient watercourses. Its surface eroded into channels that caught the wind and transformed it into an eerie, almost human murmur. The team dropped their packs in the meager shade it provided, breaking for lunch and water. It's exactly as my grandfather described it, Sullivan marveled, running his hand over the stone's weathered surface. The gateway to the claim. Gateway is a bit generous, Eleanor commented, scanning the harsh landscape that stretched before them. From here, we're entering the most confusing section of the canyon system. Dozens of blind ravines, passages that circle back on themselves, terrain that can change completely after a single thunderstorm. Marcus exchanged a glance with his brother. Sounds like a great place to hide something valuable. Or hide from someone, Olivia added, her gaze lingering on a set of recent boot prints that didn't belong to their party. We're not the only ones out here. Eleanor had noticed the tracks an hour ago, but hadn't commented. Probably hunters. Game wardens occasionally patrol, though not often this deep. Sullivan studied the horizon, his expression unreadable. How well does Richard Blackwood know this section of the canyon? The question confirmed Eleanor's growing suspicion that there was history between the two men beyond what Joseph had mentioned. Well enough to navigate the main passages with GPS assistance, not well enough to find his way if that technology failed. Good. Sullivan's tone held grim satisfaction. Because after today, I'd prefer if our exact route wasn't easily traceable. What aren't you telling me, Mr. Sullivan? Eleanor kept her voice low, though the others were engaged in their own conversations. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, which he handed to her wordlessly. It was a legal notice, a mineral rights claim filed by Blackwood Exploration Subsidiary against the same general territory where Sullivan's grandfather had apparently staked his original claim. Filed 2 days ago, Sullivan explained quietly. Somehow Richard got wind of our expedition. He's trying to beat us to the punch. This is about more than family history then. Sullivan's expression hardened. My grandfather discovered something in these canyons that he believed was valuable enough to keep secret, even from his own family. All he left were cryptic journal entries and a warning that men would kill for what lies beneath the Whispering Stone. I've spent a decade trying to piece together what he found. And now Richard Blackwood is racing you to it. Eleanor handed back the document. Why bring a lawyer on an expedition like this? Because whatever we find, I need documented, legally witnessed, and secured immediately. Richard has political connections I can't match. My only advantage is finding the claim first and establishing clear legal ownership. Before Eleanor could respond, Olivia called out from several yards away, where she'd been examining the rock formation more closely. Mr. Sullivan, I think you should see this. Some. They joined her at a section of the rock face partially concealed by overgrown scrub. Olivia had cleared away enough vegetation to reveal crude markings carved into the stone, a series of symbols that appeared deliberately arranged. Are those Native American petroglyphs? Nathan asked, leaning closer. Eleanor shook her head. No, this is newer. 50, maybe 60 years old. And these aren't indigenous symbols. She traced the markings with her finger. These are old mining claim markers, but encoded. Sullivan consulted his grandfather's journal, excitement visible in his movements. Yes, he mentions this. Mark the stone with the navigator's cipher where only a patient man would look. Can you read it? It's a directional guide. Eleanor studied the markings, her mind automatically translating the crude symbols. But it's deliberately misleading. See these arrows? They point west. But these countermarkers indicate that's a false trail. The true direction is... She followed the more subtle pattern, her finger tracing what most would miss. Northeast, following the shadow line of Split Mesa during the summer solstice. Marcus looked impressed despite his earlier skepticism. How could you possibly know that? Because these are similar to markers Michael and I found throughout the canyon system. Old prospectors develop their own codes to misdirect competitors. Once you learn the basic principles, you can decipher most of them. Sullivan was already repacking his gear, energized by the discovery. Then we head northeast. How far to Split Mesa? 3 hours if we push the pace, Eleanor replied, already calculating their route through the increasingly dangerous terrain. But we should make camp before reaching it. The approach can be treacherous in fading light. The team moved out again, their earlier fatigue forgotten in the wake of this first concrete evidence supporting Sullivan's quest. As they navigated through narrowing passages, Eleanor maintained a mental inventory of every turn, every landmark, building the return route in her mind even as they ventured deeper into the canyon labyrinth. They made camp that evening in a protected alcove, the sheer walls providing natural shelter from the wind that had begun to pick up, carrying the distant scent of rain. Eleanor recognized the signs. A storm system was moving in from the west, still a day or two away, but worth monitoring. Flash floods were the canyon's deadliest hazard, turning dry ravines into raging torrents within minutes. After dinner, as the team gathered around the small fire, Sullivan opened his grandfather's journal and read aloud passages describing the discovery of his claim. The old man's words painted a vivid picture of the hardships he'd endured, the competitors he evaded, and his eventual discovery of something he called the Red Vein, a geological formation unlike anything he'd seen before. He never specified what mineral he found, Sullivan explained, closing the journal carefully. But he wrote that it was worth more than gold to those with vision. That was in 1962. He died before he could return and develop the claim properly. Why wait so long to search for it? Grace asked, voicing the question Eleanor had been considering. The journal was lost for decades. My father had no interest in mining or his own father's desert obsessions, as he called them. It wasn't until after my father died that I found the journal in a box of old papers. Sullivan stared into the flames. By then, I recognized the significance of what my grandfather might have discovered, which is, Marcus pressed. Sullivan exchanged glances with Olivia before answering. Based on his descriptions and the geological surveys of this region, we believe he found a significant deposit of rare earth elements, specifically an unusual concentration of neodymium and dysprosium. Nathan whistled softly. Critical components for everything from wind turbines to military guidance systems. Exactly. Elements that the United States currently imports almost entirely from China. Sullivan's voice took on an edge of urgency. If my grandfather's claim contains what we think it does, it could be strategically significant on a national level. The revelation cast their expedition in an entirely new light. This wasn't just about family legacy or even commercial mining rights. It was about resources that governments considered crucial to national security. No wonder Sullivan had been so careful. No wonder Richard Blackwood was suddenly so interested. As the others continued discussing the implications, Eleanor slipped away from the fire to check the perimeter of their camp. The wind had strengthened, carrying not just the promise of distant rain, but something else. the faint but unmistakable scent of cigarette smoke. Someone was nearby, watching. She moved silently along the edge of the firelight, her eyes adjusting to the darkness beyond. There, a brief flare of orange as someone took a drag, quickly extinguished, but not before she marked the location. Approximately 200 yards west, positioned on a rise that would give clear sight lines to their camp. Eleanor returned to the fire, catching Sullivan's eye and gesturing subtly for him to join her away from the others. "We're being watched," she informed him quietly. "Single observer West Ridge, possibly a scout." Sullivan's hand moved instinctively to the sidearm he carried concealed beneath his jacket. "Blackwood, most likely. The question is whether they're just tracking us or planning something more direct." She glanced up at the darkening sky. "The storm system moving in might work to our advantage. Water will obscure tracks, and the canyon acoustics during rainfall make it nearly impossible to track by sound." "Can you lose them?" Sullivan asked, his voice tight with controlled tension. Eleanor nodded, already formulating the route adjustments in her mind. "But it means taking paths no one else would attempt. Risky passages that won't appear on any map Blackwood might have." "Do it, whatever it takes." Sullivan's expression hardened with resolve. "Because if Richard Blackwood is willing to sabotage your equipment just to pressure you into selling your business, I don't want to find out what he'd do to claim a discovery worth millions." "Billions," Eleanor corrected softly, "if the deposit is as significant as you believe." In the flickering light of the campfire, shadows played across Sullivan's face, deepening the lines of determination or obsession that had driven him to search for his grandfather's legacy. "Then we need to reach it first, Mrs. Thorne. Before Blackwood, before the storm, before whatever else this canyon decides to throw at us." What neither of them realized as they rejoined the group was that the observer on the ridge wasn't working for Richard Blackwood at all, but for someone with far more dangerous intentions for what lay hidden beneath Whispering Rock. Who is the mysterious observer watching their expedition? What deadly secrets will the approaching storm reveal? And can Eleanor navigate the treacherous canyon paths without modern equipment while evading whoever is tracking them? Stay tuned to discover the answers. Creating and narrating this story takes us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, please let us know in the comments and subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story as Eleanor leads the team deeper into territory few have ever seen. Eleanor woke everyone before dawn, the eastern horizon barely tinged with gray. The air felt heavy with moisture, the storm drawing closer, perfect for her purposes. "Change of plans," she announced as the team blearily packed their gear. "We're taking an alternate route to Split Mesa." Marcus frowned, checking his GPS unit. "The most direct course is still northeast." "Direct doesn't mean safest," Eleanor replied, deliberately not mentioning their observer from the previous night. "There's an unmapped passage through Phantom Gorge that will provide better shelter if the storm hits early." Sullivan backed her decision without question, his authority silencing any further debate. Within 20 minutes, they were moving in single file along a nearly invisible game trail that curved west before doubling back through a narrow crack in the canyon wall, a fissure so tight they had to remove their packs and push them ahead to squeeze through. The passage opened into a sheltered ravine, untouched by direct sunlight, its walls covered in pale green lichen that gave the stone an otherworldly appearance. Water trickled down one wall, collecting in a shallow pool ringed with delicate ferns, an oasis hidden within the arid landscape. "This is incredible," Olivia whispered, running her hand over moisture-slick stone. "How is this not on any geological survey?" "Because you can't see it from above, and the entrance is nearly impossible to spot unless you know exactly where to look," Eleanor explained, refilling her canteen from the spring. "Michael and I found it by accident during a flash flood 15 years ago. We were forced to take shelter in the fissure and discovered this place waiting on the other side." The ravine led deeper into the canyon system through increasingly narrow passages that twisted and turned like the chambers of a stone labyrinth. Eleanor navigated with absolute confidence, occasionally pausing to consult Michael's old compass. Not because she needed directional guidance, but to confirm subtle magnetic variations he had documented years earlier. By midday, the storm clouds had swallowed the sky, turning the narrow strip visible above them into a rolling ceiling of charcoal gray. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a gusting wind carried the first spatters of rain into their faces. "We need to find higher ground before this hits fully," Nathan said, eyeing the narrow canyon walls with concern. "Even a moderate rainfall could turn our path into a deadly surge of water." "Already heading there," Eleanor assured him, leading them up a steep switchbacking trail that seemed to disappear into solid rock at several points, only to reveal hidden turns that continued the ascent. The route was treacherous, requiring careful foot placement, and in two sections, improvised rope assistance to navigate particularly exposed segments. "You've got to be kidding me," Marcus muttered as they reached a spot where the path appeared to end at a sheer wall. "Now what?" Eleanor didn't answer directly. Instead, she moved to a seemingly random spot 10 feet to the left and pushed aside a curtain of withered vines, revealing a dark opening barely wide enough for an adult to pass through. "Our shelter," she announced, ducking inside. The team followed, emerging into a cave that extended deep into the mesa's interior. Unlike the narrow ravine they had traversed earlier, this space bore unmistakable signs of human modification. Crude stone steps leading to a leveled floor area, niches carved into the walls that once held tools or supplies, and most remarkably, faded pictographs covering one entire wall. This was a mining camp, Sullivan realized, examining the space with newfound interest. Old, late 1800s, if I had to guess. 1873, Eleanor corrected. These caves were worked by a group of Confederate deserters who fled west after the Civil War. They were searching for silver, but found only enough to sustain operations for about 5 years before abandoning the claim. Olivia had moved to examine the pictographs, her flashlight illuminating images of stick figures, animals, celestial bodies, and geometric patterns, all executed in faded red ochre. "These aren't from the miners. These are much older, indigenous artwork." "Navajo," Eleanor confirmed. "Joseph showed these to me years ago. His grandfather helped hide the deserters here in exchange for medicine and tools. According to tribal oral history, this place was considered sacred long before the miners arrived, a place where the earth's blood rose close to the surface." Sullivan joined Olivia at the wall, his expression intense as he studied the ancient images. "Earth's blood? That could be a reference to mineral deposits. If he ran his fingers over a particular section where concentric circles surrounded what appeared to be a lightning bolt striking the ground. "This symbol, it appears in my grandfather's journal, copied exactly." Eleanor wasn't surprised. The miners didn't find much silver, but they did discover unusual red crystals embedded in the stone. They thought them worthless compared to precious metals, but your grandfather might have recognized their true value. The storm hit in full force as they settled into the cave, rain sheeting down outside the entrance, and drumming on the stone overhead, where water found pathways through fissures in the mesa. They made camp in the cave's main chamber, the pictograph wall serving as backdrop to their fire. As the others prepared a simple meal, Sullivan approached Eleanor, where she sat mapping their day's journey in a small notebook, not for her own benefit, but to provide the team with a record of their route. "You deliberately led us here," he observed, his tone more curious than accusatory. "This wasn't just a convenient shelter." Eleanor nodded, completing the sketch before answering. "Your grandfather's journal mentioned the red vein. These caves have the same geological markers, though the deposit here was smaller. I thought seeing these might help confirm what we're looking for, and lose our shadow in the process." Sullivan glanced toward the cave entrance, where rain continued to fall in wind-blown sheets. "No one could have followed us through those passages without being seen. That was the secondary benefit." Sullivan studied her with new appreciation. "You're more than just a guide with a good memory, Mrs. Thorne. You think strategically in canyon country. Failing to think 3 steps ahead gets people killed." She closed her notebook. "But there's something you should know. This cave system connects to a broader network that runs throughout this section of the mesa. If your grandfather discovered a significant deposit of rare earth elements, it's likely part of a larger geological formation that includes these caverns. Meaning we might be closer to the claim site than I thought. Possibly, but it also means we're not the first to make that connection." Eleanor stood, gesturing for Sullivan to follow her deeper into the cave, away from the others. Their flashlight beams illuminated a tunnel leading further into the mesa, its floor bearing the unmistakable marks of recent foot traffic. "Someone's been exploring these caves, and recently." Sullivan crouched to examine the scuff marks and partial boot prints preserved in the mineral-crusted soil. Blackwood? The timing fits, but these don't match standard hiking or exploration gear. Eleanor pointed to a distinctive tread pattern. Military-style tactical boots. High-end, not typical equipment for casual explorers or even Blackwood's guides. Before Sullivan could respond, Olivia called from the main chamber. "You need to see this." There was an urgency in her voice that brought them hurrying back. She had been examining the cave floor more carefully and had discovered something beneath decades of dust. A metal box approximately the size of a small suitcase, partially buried near the base of the pictograph wall. The team gathered around as Sullivan carefully excavated it, revealing a military ammunition case dating from the Korean War era. "This could be my grandfather's," Sullivan said, voice tight with anticipation. The case was locked, its surface corroded, but largely intact. He was stationed in Korea in '52. Using tools from their packs, they managed to pry the rusted lock apart. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them remarkably well, were dozens of geological samples, each carefully labeled in faded handwriting. Beneath these lay a leather portfolio containing maps, letters, and most importantly, a detailed claim registration that had never been filed with any government office. "My God," Sullivan breathed, examining the documents with trembling hands. "This is it. The exact coordinates, the full mineral analysis." He looked up at his team, excitement breaking through his usual reserve. He found a primary deposit of rare earth elements more concentrated than anything documented in North America, and he kept it completely off the record. Grace moved to examine the claim document. "This is incredible, but legally complex. An unfiled claim from the 1960s. We'll need to work quickly to establish modern rights." "That's why you're here," Sullivan confirmed before turning to Olivia. "What do you make of these samples?" The geologist had been examining the specimens with professional intensity. "If these labels are accurate, your grandfather found an unprecedented deposit. The neodymium concentrations alone would make this commercially significant, but the combination of elements here—" She looked up, her expression serious. "Mr. Sullivan, this isn't just valuable, it's strategically critical. Rare earth elements in these concentrations could make the country self-sufficient in technologies currently dependent on foreign sources." Nathan whistled softly. "No wonder Richard Blackwood is rushing to file his own claim. If he got wind of this—" "He wouldn't," Sullivan interrupted sharply. "Only 5 people knew I was resuming my grandfather's search, and I trust all of them with my life." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Someone had leaked information. That much was clear from Blackwood's sudden interest and the advanced filing of his claim. The question of who hung unspoken in the air. "What matters now," Eleanor said pragmatically, "is reaching the primary deposit site and documenting your claim before anyone else can. According to these coordinates, how far are we from the main site?" Sullivan studied the map. "If this is accurate, less than 5 miles as the crow flies, but, sucker," he traced the route marked on the yellowed paper. "The approach is complicated." He indicates a series of caverns that connect under the mesa, emerging near what he calls Sentinel Spire. Eleanor knew the formation immediately. "That's at the far end of Spectre Canyon. From here it would be at least 2 days overland. Longer if the storm washes out any routes through the lower passes." "And through these caves?" Marcus asked, eyeing the dark tunnel they had investigated earlier. "Unknown," Eleanor admitted. "Michael and I explored some of the connecting passages but never mapped the full system. It could be more direct, but cave navigation brings its own risks. Dead ends, unstable chambers, underwater sections." Sullivan carefully rewrapped the documents and selected samples, placing them in his own pack. "We continue underground. If these passages connect to the deposit site as my grandfather indicated, it's our best chance to move undetected." Sherwoodforn. The decision made, they spent the remainder of the day preparing for cave exploration. Eleanor inventoried their limited equipment, determining what could be repurposed for the underground journey. With their headlamps, spare batteries, and ropes, they could manage basic caving, though not with the safety margin she would normally insist upon. As the others rested before their underground venture, Eleanor returned to the pictograph wall, studying the ancient images with renewed interest. Among the abstract symbols and representational figures, one particular sequence caught her attention. a series of connected spirals leading to a central, sun-like image. The pattern was strikingly similar to the tunnel system they had begun to explore, suggesting the indigenous people had mapped the underground passages in their sacred artwork. "It's a navigation guide," Eleanor murmured, tracing the pattern with her fingertip. The realization sent a shiver of excitement through her. If she could interpret these symbols correctly, they might have a map more reliable than modern instruments for the labyrinth ahead. She was so absorbed in the discovery that she barely registered the subtle shift in air pressure that preceded a sound no caver wants to hear: the distant rumble of rock collapsing somewhere in the tunnel system. The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly, and dust sifted down from crevices in the ceiling. The others jolted awake at the noise, alarm evident on their faces. "What was that?" Grace asked, her voice tight with fear. "Cave in," Marcus answered grimly, already reaching for his headlamp. "Somewhere in the system." They gathered at the entrance to the main tunnel, Eleanor and Sullivan taking the lead as they cautiously advanced into the darkness. The air grew noticeably dustier as they progressed, forcing them to cover their mouths and noses with bandanas. After approximately 200 yards, they discovered the source of the disturbance. A section of ceiling had collapsed, completely blocking the passage ahead. "Natural?" Nathan asked, examining the debris with his headlamp. Eleanor inspected the edges of the collapse carefully, noting several critical details: the clean cuts on some of the rock faces, the remnants of boreholes visible in the larger fragments. "No," she said finally. "This was deliberately triggered. Someone used explosives to seal this tunnel." The implications hung heavy in the air. Someone had been here very recently and had taken drastic measures to block their path or trap them inside. "There must be another way through," Sullivan insisted, his determination unwavering despite this setback. Eleanor thought of the pictograph map she'd been studying. "I think there is. The wall paintings suggest multiple connecting passages." Amory. They returned to the main chamber where Eleanor carefully photographed the pictographs using her aging digital camera, one piece of technology that had survived Blackwood's sabotage. She then sketched the key patterns in her notebook, creating a working translation of what she believed was a map of the cave system. "If I'm interpreting this correctly," she explained to the group, pointing to her sketch, "there are 3 main tunnel networks. The one that just collapsed was the most direct route, but there's another passage that branches from what they depicted as the sleeping snake's tail, which I think refers to this curved formation at the back of the main chamber." Sure enough, behind a cluster of fallen rocks that they had assumed marked the chamber's boundary, they discovered a narrow opening leading into another tunnel system. This passage was tighter than the first, requiring them to proceed single file and occasionally crawl through constricted sections. The going was slow and psychologically taxing. The beams of their headlamps cut through absolute darkness, revealing glimpses of a world few humans had ever seen. Delicate crystal formations growing from walls slick with mineral-rich moisture, strange pale insects scuttling away from the light, ancient fossils embedded in stone laid down millions of years before the first human walked the earth. After what felt like hours but was probably less than 90 minutes, the passage widened into a significant chamber where multiple tunnels converged like spokes on a wheel. Here they paused to rest and reorient. "According to the pictograph map, we want the third opening from the left," Eleanor indicated. "That should lead toward Sentinel Spire." "Should?" Marcus questioned, his earlier skepticism returning. "We're betting our lives on your interpretation of prehistoric cave paintings?" "You're welcome to use your GPS," Eleanor replied evenly, "but the signal won't penetrate this much rock, and the magnetic properties of these formations make compasses unreliable." Sullivan had been examining the chamber with particular interest, his headlamp lingering on a section of wall where the stone had a distinctly reddish cast. He moved closer, then called Olivia over with growing excitement. "Look at this matrix. It's exactly what my grandfather described." The geologist inspected the rock face, then carefully chipped off a small sample. "It's similar to the specimens in the case, but with even higher concentrations, if I'm judging correctly. We must be getting close to the primary deposit." Their path chosen both by ancient guidance and geological confirmation, they pressed on through the third tunnel. The passage began to slope noticeably upward, the floor transitioning from smooth, worn stone to increasingly jagged terrain that required careful navigation. Water had begun to seep through fissures in the ceiling, likely from the continuing storm above, creating slick patches that threatened treacherous falls. They had been underground for nearly 4 hours when Eleanor, still in the lead, felt a change in the air, a subtle freshening that suggested proximity to the surface. The tunnel curved sharply upward, culminating in a tight chimney that required technical climbing to ascend. "I'll go first," she decided, securing one of their precious ropes to provide assistance for the others. The climb was challenging but manageable, the rock offering sufficient handholds for someone with experience. At the top of the chimney, the passage narrowed to a crevice barely wider than her shoulders. She squeezed through, emerging into a space where ambient light penetrated from somewhere above. Eleanor climbed toward the light source, eventually reaching a small opening partially concealed by fallen debris and overgrown vegetation. Pushing aside the natural camouflage, she peered out into rain-washed daylight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by running water and mist that clung to the canyon walls like ghostly veils. And there, rising majestically against the clearing sky directly ahead, stood Sentinel Spire, a needle-like formation of red sandstone that marked the entrance to Spectre Canyon. They had navigated successfully through the underground labyrinth, emerging precisely where Sullivan's grandfather had indicated the primary deposit would be found. As she helped the others emerge from the cave system, Eleanor felt a growing sense of unease. Their underground journey had been successful, too successful perhaps. The collapsed tunnel suggested someone was actively working to prevent their progress. Yet they had reached their destination with relative ease through the secondary route. It was almost as if they had been herded here, guided along a predetermined path to this specific location. The question was, who was waiting for them to emerge, and what would happen when they finally reached the legendary red vein that had remained hidden for over half a century? What dangers await the team at Sentinel Spire? Who deliberately collapsed the tunnel to guide their path? And what will happen when they finally discover the secret that Eleanor's husband may have died to protect? The answers are coming in our next chapter. Before we continue our journey into the heart of the canyon, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments below. And if you're finding this story of survival and courage inspiring, please consider sharing it with someone who might enjoy it too. Now let's rejoin Eleanor and the team as they approach the mysterious Sentinel Spire. The land surrounding Sentinel Spire existed in permanent twilight, its narrow confines rarely touched by direct sunlight. Sheer walls rose on 3 sides, creating a natural amphitheater where sound behaved strangely, sometimes amplifying to thunderous proportions, other times swallowing noise completely. Water from the recent storm cascaded down the cliff faces in silver ribbons, collecting in pools that reflected the crimson-streaked stone above. "It's exactly as he described it," Sullivan breathed, comparing the scene before them to a hand-drawn sketch from his grandfather's journal. The cathedral where Earth offers its rarest treasures. Eleanor surveyed their surroundings with professional caution. They had emerged onto a narrow ledge approximately 20 feet above the canyon floor, partially concealed by an overhang. From this vantage point, she could see the entire basin that formed the approach to Spectre Canyon. Most importantly, she could confirm they were alone, at least for the moment. "We should move quickly," she advised, helping Grace navigate the slippery descent to the ground below. "This place will be dangerous if another storm cell moves through. The entire basin can flood within minutes." Olivia had already shifted into research mode, examining exposed rock strata along the canyon walls with growing excitement. "The geological markers are textbook perfect. Look at these intrusion patterns, classic signs of rare earth mineralization. Sullivan, your grandfather was a genius to recognize this formation at a time when these elements weren't even commercially significant." Sullivan nodded absently, his attention fixed on a dark opening at the base of Sentinel Spire. "That's it. The entrance to the main deposit. It has to be." The opening was unremarkable at first glance, just another shadow among many where erosion had carved recesses into the canyon wall. But as they approached, distinctive features emerged. Tool marks around the edges where the natural opening had been carefully expanded, weathered timber reinforcing the entrance, and most tellingly, a crude symbol carved into the stone above, matching one from the indigenous pictographs they had studied earlier. "The Earth's blood," Marcus murmured, recognizing the symbol. His earlier skepticism had given way to professional curiosity. They paused at the entrance, Sullivan checking the stability of the aged support timbers while Olivia assessed potential geological hazards. The entrance appeared stable despite its age, suggesting the original mining work had been expertly done. Standard mining protocols, Sullivan directed, switching on his headlamp. No one enters or leaves alone. We maintain voice contact at all times. Any sign of instability, we retreat immediately. Shiwi-wi-yiu. With Sullivan and Olivia taking the lead, they entered the ancient mine. Unlike the natural cave system they had navigated earlier, this tunnel showed clear signs of human engineering, a relatively level floor, consistent width, and ceiling height that accommodated comfortable passage. Wooden support structures appeared at regular intervals, remarkably preserved in the dry desert air. Korean War-era construction techniques, Sullivan noted, examining the support bracing. My grandfather would have learned these during his military service. These are holding up better than modern hydraulic supports in some cases. The tunnel extended approximately 50 yards into the base of the spire before opening into a larger chamber. As their headlamps swept the space, Olivia gasped audibly. The walls glittered with embedded crystals that caught and reflected their light in flashes of deep crimson. It's magnificent, she whispered, approaching one wall with reverent caution. I've never seen such concentration. These aren't just rare earth elements. This is a geological anomaly that shouldn't exist. While Olivia and the Brooks brothers conducted preliminary examinations, Sullivan retrieved the claim documents from his pack, comparing the hand-drawn maps to their current location. This is definitely the primary chamber his notes describe, but he indicates additional workings deeper in the formation. Eleanor had been studying the chamber with a guide's practiced eye, noting details others might miss: air circulation patterns, subtle changes in temperature, the way sound carried. Something didn't match her expectations. This mine is still active, she stated with quiet certainty. The team turned to her in surprise. That's impossible, Marcus objected. The entrance was practically invisible. The supports are decades old. No one's touched this place since Sullivan's grandfather. Eleanor moved to a seemingly solid section of wall and ran her hand along its surface, finding what she was looking for. A nearly invisible seam where natural stone met carefully disguised modern materials. This is a false wall constructed recently. There's active mining happening beyond this point. Sullivan joined her, examining the disguised barrier. She's right. This is advanced camouflage material, the kind used in military applications. He pressed his ear against the surface. And there's mechanical noise on the other side. Faint but regular. Who would be mining here secretly? Grace asked, legal implications already forming in her mind. This claim wasn't registered with any government agency. Someone who doesn't want federal oversight, Nathan suggested. Or someone who discovered the deposit independently and wants to keep it off international markets. Sullivan's expression had darkened. Or someone my grandfather trusted with the location who decided the A's Eleanor stands at the observation deck of the newly dedicated Michael Thorne Canyon Safety Center. She knows her victory means more than personal justice. It represents what her generation always understood, that human knowledge, experience, and determination will always triumph over shortcuts in technology. The rare earth minerals her team discovered have now become America's strategic advantage, no longer dependent on foreign sources for our military and energy infrastructure. The traditions of the frontier spirit, self-reliance, perseverance, and intimate knowledge of the land proved more powerful than all of Blackwood's modern equipment and corporate connections. For men who explored wilderness trails, served their country, built things with their hands, or navigated by the stars rather than satellites, Eleanor's story is a vindication of timeless values. Sometimes the old ways are still the best ways, especially when guided by wisdom that can only come from decades of experience. Next week, we'll bring you the incredible story of a Vietnam veteran who uses forgotten combat skills to protect his rural community when law enforcement fails. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with someone who still believes in American exceptionalism and the power of the experienced mind.